Blood-stained scrubs usually imply a failed surgery, not a successful kill count. But in the remote hills of Sector 4, nothing was what it seemed. The insurgents breached the perimeter at 0300 hours, expecting terrified doctors and helpless patients. Instead, they walked into the crosshairs of a woman who knew the windage of a storm better than she knew the dosage of morphine. Beatrix Cole wasn't just the night nurse who checked IV drips. She was a ghost from a decommissioned Black Ops unit, hiding in the last place anyone would look. And on this night, the stethoscope came off and the rifle came out. The rain in the Zagros Mountains didn't wash things clean. It just turned the world into a slurry of mud and cold dread. Inside Field Hospital Bravo, a collection of reinforced tents and prefabs shuddering under the storm, the air smelled of antiseptic and stale coffee. Beatrix Cole adjusted the flow on the IV bag, her movements economical and precise. She was 42, with greying hair pulled back into a severe bun and eyes that looked like shattered glass, dull, fragmented, and impossible to read. To the staff at Bravo, she was just B, the night nurse who never spoke unless spoken to, never laughed at the doctor's crude jokes, and never flinched when the mortars landed too close. "B, you're hovering again," Dr. Liam Kincaid muttered, not looking up from his tablet. He was young, brilliant, and arrogant, a dangerous combination in a war zone. He sat at the nurse's station, scrolling through inventory logs. "Mrs. Gable in bed 3 is stable. Go take a break. You're making the residents nervous." "Monitoring vitals isn't hovering, Doctor," B said, her voice a low rasp. She didn't look at him. She was watching the dark window, where the rain lashed against the plastic sheeting. "The pressure is dropping outside. Storm's getting worse." "It's just rain, B. Not an airstrike," Liam scoffed, spinning his pen. "You need to relax. You treat this place like a fortress instead of a hospital. It's been quiet for 3 weeks. Even the insurgents hate this weather." B didn't answer. She walked to the window, peering through the reflection. She wasn't looking at the rain. She was looking at the sight lines. The perimeter fence was 200 yards out, poorly lit. The guard tower on the north ridge was currently obscured by fog, a tactical nightmare. She had spent the last 6 months here, washing bedpans and changing bandages, burying a past that was soaked in significantly more blood than this trauma ward. The name Beatrix Cole was real enough, but the nursing degree was a fabrication by a handler, who was now likely dead or in prison. Before the scrubs, she was Sergeant Cole of the 1st Special Forces Operational Detachment Delta's unparalleled sniper initiative, a ghost program that didn't officially exist. She had 64 confirmed kills. But here, she was just the woman who made sure the generator didn't stall. "Hey, B!" Nurse Chloe, a bubbly 20-something from Ohio who treated war tourism like a gap year, bounced up to her. "Did you hear? We're getting a transfer tonight. Some bigwig from the diplomatic corps got caught in an IED blast near the convoy route. Major Silas Graves is bringing him in personally." B's spine stiffened. Major Silas Graves. That was a name she knew, a man who asked too many questions. "When?" B asked, her tone flat. "ETA 10 minutes. It's going to be a mess. Trauma 1 is prepping. You want in?" "No," B said, turning back to the hallway. "I'll handle the overflow in the recovery ward. Keep the noise down." She walked away, her soft-soled shoes making no sound on the linoleum. She needed to be invisible. If Graves recognized her, if he realized that the night nurse was actually the rogue operator known as the Wraith, she wouldn't be fighting insurgents. She'd be fighting a court-martial. She checked her watch. 2:45 a.m. The lights flickered. The generator hummed, choked, and then resumed its steady drone. In the supply closet at the end of the hall, behind stacks of sterile gauze and saline crates, sat a locked, nondescript hard case labeled "Ventilator Parts Do Not Touch." It didn't contain medical equipment. It held a disassembled Chaytak M200 intervention sniper rifle and a Glock 19 with 3 magazines of hollow points. B touched the keypad on the door, just to ensure it was locked. Paranoia was a survival trait. Suddenly the radio at the nurse's station crackled to life, static cutting through the quiet hum of the ward. "Bravo base, this is Convoy Alpha 2. Taking fire. Repeat, taking heavy fire. We are punching through the gate. Get the trauma team ready. We have multiple critical." The calm of the night shattered. Dr. Liam jumped up, his arrogance replaced by sudden panic. "Code Blue! Everyone to the bay! Move!" B didn't run. She moved with a terrifying, fluid speed, grabbing a trauma kit and moving toward the entrance. But her eyes weren't on the medical supplies. She was scanning the perimeter cameras on the wall monitor. The feed from camera 4 was dead. The feed from camera 5 was showing static. "It's not just a hit and run," Bea whispered to herself, the old instincts flaring up like a struck match. "They're blinding us." She looked at Chloe, who was trembling as she pulled on gloves. "Chloe," Bea said, grabbing the girl's arm, "listen to me. Don't go to the main entrance." "What? Bea, let go. They need us." "Go to the rear supply room. Lock the door. Do not open it unless you hear." Set my voice. Exactly my voice. "Bea, you're scaring me." "Go!" Bea shoved her, harder than necessary. As Chloe ran, the front doors of the field hospital burst open. Wet, muddy soldiers dragged in 2 stretchers. Major Silas Graves marched in behind them, blood streaming from a cut on his forehead, his rifle raised. "Secure the doors!" Graves roared. "We've got hostiles in the wire. Close it up!" The storm had breached the hospital, but the storm outside was nothing compared to what was about to happen inside. The chaos in the triage bay was deafening. Rain whipped in through the open bay doors before the Marines could slam them shut. The smell of copper and wet earth filled the room. On the first stretcher lay a man in a torn grey suit, the diplomat. He was unconscious, his chest heaving, a dark stain spreading across his abdomen. On the second was a young corporal, his leg a mess of shredded tactical gear and bone. "Get a line in him," Dr. Liam shouted, his hands shaking as he cut away the diplomat's shirt. "I need O negative, stat. Where is the blood bank key?" Bea appeared at his elbow, a bag of saline already spiked. She slapped it into his hand. "Focus, doctor. He's tensioning. You need to decompress the chest." Liam looked at her, wild-eyed. I know that." He fumbled for a needle. B watched the doors. Major Graves was shouting orders to his men. There were only 4 of them left standing, ragged, exhausted, and low on ammo. "Sarge, report," Graves barked into his shoulder mic. Static. "Command, this is Graves. We are at Bravo, requesting immediate air support. Over." Static. Graves slammed his fist against the wall. "Damn it, they're jamming the signal." He turned to the room, his eyes scanning the terrified medical staff until they landed on B. He paused, a flicker of recognition passing through his gaze, but the situation was too dire to process it. "Who's in charge of this facility?" Graves demanded. "Dr. Kincaid," Bea said, pointing to Liam, who was currently trying to stop a spurting artery. "Doctor, we have about 5 minutes before the main force hits us," Graves said, stepping over a coil of tubing. "We were ambushed 2 clicks out. This wasn't a random IED. They knew the route. They knew the cargo." He pointed at the unconscious diplomat. "That man is holding the ceasefire codes for the entire northern region. If they take him, the war restarts tomorrow." Liam looked up, pale. "We're a hospital. We have protection under the Geneva Convention." Graves laughed, a dark, humorless bark. "The men coming through that rain don't care about conventions. They are mercenaries paid by the syndicate. They want him alive, and they want everyone else dead to cover their tracks." A sudden, thunderous boom shook the ground. The lights died completely. Screams erupted from the nursing staff. The emergency red lights bathed the room in a bloody glow. "Generators down!" a Marine shouted from the door. "They hit the fuel tank," Bea said. Her voice was calm, cutting through the panic. She moved away from the table. "Major, how many hostiles?" Graves looked at her. really looked at her this time. He saw the way she stood, feet shoulder-width apart, weight balanced, hands free. That wasn't a nurse's stance. Platoon strength, maybe 40, heavily armed, night vision, body armor. "And you have 4 men," B stated. "4 Marines," Graves corrected, though his grimace betrayed his doubt. "We can hold the main entrance." "They won't come through the main entrance," B said. She walked over to the wall map of the facility. "They cut the power to kill the perimeter lights. They jammed the comms so we can't call for evac. They want to funnel us," she pointed to the east wing, where the recovery ward was. "The drainage ditch runs right past the east wall. The rain will have filled it, masking their heat signatures from thermal scopes if you had them. They'll breach the recovery ward, flank your position in the main hall, and catch you in a crossfire." Graves narrowed his eyes. "How do you know the terrain that well, nurse?" "I take walks," B said dryly. "If you put your men at the front door, you'll be dead in 10 minutes. And why should I listen to a nurse over my tactical training?" Crack. Glass shattered in the hallway leading to the east wing. A thud followed, the sound of a body hitting the floor. "Because I'm right," B said. "Contact right! East wing!" A Marine screamed, firing his rifle blindly down the dark corridor. Muzzle flashes lit up the smoke. The engagement had begun. "Get the patient to the secure room in the back," Graves yelled, raising his rifle. "Suppressing fire!" Bullets tore through the thin drywall of the hospital. Dr. Liam tackled the nurse, Chloe, dragging her behind the metal reception desk. B didn't take cover. While the Marines focused their fire down the hall, she slipped backward into the shadows. She needed to get to the supply closet. She reached the door, punching in the code by feel. The lock clicked. She slipped inside and bolted it behind her. The sounds of war were muffled here. The screaming, the gunfire, it all felt distant. B took a breath, closing her eyes for a split second. She exhaled the persona of the weary, middle-aged nurse. She popped the latches on the hard case. There it was. The matte black finish of the disassembled rifle gleamed in the dim light of her penlight. She worked with practiced efficiency. Barrel attached, bolt inserted, scope mounted. She didn't load the Chetak yet. It was too big for close quarters. Instead, she grabbed the Glock 19 and a suppressor from the foam cutout. She screwed the suppressor onto the barrel, checked the chamber, and slotted a fresh magazine. She stripped off her scrub top, revealing a black thermal undershirt. She grabbed a roll of duct tape, taping her spare mags to her thigh, since she didn't have a tactical rig. B looked at her reflection in the metal cabinet. The tired eyes were gone. The predator was back. "Time to go to work," she whispered. She opened the supply closet door, weapon raised, moving not like a healer, but like the Reaper herself. The hospital was no longer a place of healing. It was a kill box bathed in emergency crimson light. The air, once smelling of antiseptic, was now thick with the acrid scent of cordite and burning plastic. B moved through the shadows of the East Wing corridor like ink spilled on a dark floor. The specialized training of the deepest Black Ops units didn't just teach you how to shoot. It taught you how to become part of the environment, how to slow your heart rate until you were biologically invisible. Up ahead, near the shattered window where they had breached, 2 figures moved. They were big men, clad in expensive, non-standard tactical gear, ceramic plating, fast helmets with mounted night vision goggles, NVGs. These weren't desperate local insurgents. These were Tier 1 private contractors. Expensive professionals. "Clear right," the point man whispered into his throat mic, moving to the nurse's station. "No resistance yet." "Copy that. Kalen wants the target secured in 5 mics. Burn the rest." B didn't breathe. She pressed herself into a shallow alcove housing a fire extinguisher. The point man walked right past her, his NVGs focused down the hall. He didn't see her because she wasn't moving, and her thermal signature was dampened by the cold wall she was pressed against. The second man followed, 3 paces behind. Bay moved. It wasn't a rush, it was a violent, controlled snap. She stepped out behind the second man. Before he could register the movement, her left hand clamped over his mouth, pulling his head back sharply to expose the neck. The Glock in her right hand uttered a soft pfft. The man went limp. She lowered him silently to the linoleum, not letting his gear clatter. The point man ahead stopped. He sensed the break in rhythm, the sudden absence of footsteps behind him. He began to turn, his rifle swinging around. B didn't hesitate. She raised the Glock, acquired the sight picture in the dim red light, and fired. Pff! The round took him just under the rim of his helmet, severing the brain stem. He dropped straight down, dead before he hit the floor. 2 down. At least 38 to go. She scavenged quickly. She took a frag grenade from the first man's vest and a spare magazine for his carbine, though she didn't take the rifle itself yet. It was too bulky for the tight maneuvering she planned. She moved deeper into the hospital, heading towards the main lobby, where the primary firefight was raging. The sound of automatic gunfire was deafening now. Major Graves and his Marines were holding, but the sheer volume of fire directed at them meant they were pinned. In the main triage bay, chaos reigned. Dr. Liam Kincaid was huddled behind the overturned heavy metal reception desk, his hands pressing hard on the diplomat's chest wound. "Keep pressure, damn it, Chloe, keep pressure!" Liam yelled over the roar of a light machine gun tearing apart the waiting room chairs. Nurse Chloe was crying silently, her hands slippery with blood. But she didn't let go. "Where's B? Did she get out?" "She's hiding in a closet somewhere, if she has any sense," Liam snapped. A bullet ricocheted off the desk right above his head, showering them with sparks. He yelped and ducked lower. Outside, in the rain-soaked staging area, the mercenary leader, a hulking South African named Kalen, stared at his tactical tablet. 2 of his unit icons in the east wing had just gone black. "Team 2, report," Kalen growled into his radio. Static. "Team 2, this is Kalen. Status now." Nothing. Kalen narrowed his eyes. Something's wrong. It's too quiet on the flank. Decker, take 4 men. Push through the east wing. Find out what happened to Team 2. And watch the corners. We might have a rat in the walls. Back inside, B had reached the junction where the east wing hallway met the main lobby. She peered around the corner at floor level. The scene was grim. Major Graves was behind a concrete pillar, firing controlled bursts. 1 Marine was down, motionless in a pool of blood near the door. Another was dragged behind a vending machine, clutching a shoulder wound. Only Graves and 1 other private were still effective. 6 mercenaries were advancing across the lobby, moving from cover to cover, suppressing the Marines with overwhelming fire. They were closing the noose. If Bay opened fire with the pistol now, she'd take down 1 or 2, but the other 4 would light her up instantly. She needed a distraction. She looked at the frag grenade she'd taken off the dead contractor. She pulled the pin, holding the spoon down. She needed to time this perfectly. She rolled the grenade down the hallway, aiming for a gap between the mercenaries' cover. It clattered loudly on the tile floor. "A frag out!" One of the mercenaries screamed, diving behind a leather sofa. The explosion was deafening in the confined space. Shrapnel tore through furniture and drywall. The red emergency lights flickered and died completely, plunging the lobby into absolute darkness, save for the flashes of muzzle fire. The mercenaries, temporarily deafened and disoriented, scrambled to activate their NVGs. That 3-second window of confusion was all Bea needed. She didn't attack the mercenaries. She sprinted across the open hallway behind them, moving towards the supply closet where her real weapon was waiting. "Contact rear! Someone crossed the hall!" a mercenary yelled, his vision washing out green as his NVGs booted up. They fired blindly into the darkness where she had been, bullets chewing up the wall. But she was already gone. She slammed back into the supply closet, bolting the door. Her chest was heaving now. The Glock was getting hot. She holstered the pistol and turned to the metal table. The Chaytak M200 intervention was waiting. It was a massive weapon, almost absurd for indoor combat. It was designed to kill people from a mile away. But right now, it was the only thing she had that could punch through the heavy ceramic body armor the mercenaries were wearing. She grabbed a magazine loaded with .408 Cheyenne tactical solid brass solids, rounds designed to disable engine blocks. She slammed it into the mag well and racked the enormous bolt. The sound was heavy, mechanical, a promise of absolute destruction. She wasn't a nurse anymore. She wasn't even just a soldier. She was the apex predator in this concrete jungle. She kicked the supply closet door open and stepped back into the hallway, the massive rifle shouldered. Down the hall, Kaylin's second team, led by Decker, was advancing cautiously, stepping over the bodies of the men Bear had killed earlier. "Kaylin, we found Team 2, both KIA. Headshots. Clean." Decker's voice was shaky. "This isn't random fire. Someone knows what they're doing." "Push forward," Kaylin commanded. "Find them." Decker turned the corner, his NVG scanning the gloom. At the far end of the 50-foot hallway, he saw a silhouette in the red emergency light that had just flickered back on. It was a woman in a thermal undershirt, holding a rifle that looked bigger than she was. Before Decker could raise his weapon, Bear fired. The roar of the unsuppressed Chaytak inside the hallway was indescribable. It was a physical blow that shook the dust from the ceiling tiles. The .408 round hit Decker center mass. The expensive ceramic plate on his chest didn't just crack, it disintegrated. The kinetic energy lifted him off his feet and threw him backward into the two men behind him. Silence followed the thunderclap, save for the ringing in everyone's ears. B cycled the bolt, ejecting the massive brass casing with a clang onto the floor. She chambered another round. "You have 10 seconds to leave my hospital," B called out, her voice raspy but projecting clearly down the hall. "After that, I stop aiming for the center of mass." The psychological impact of the Chaytak shot was immediate. The remaining mercenaries in the hallway scrambled back around the corner, dragging Decker's ruined body with them. They were hired killers, used to overwhelming force, but they weren't used to facing anti-materiel rifles in close quarters. "RPG! Bring up the RPG!" Kaylin roared over the comms from outside. He had heard the shot. He knew that sound. "They have a goddamn sniper rifle in there." B knew she couldn't stay static. The Chaytak was powerful, but it was slow, and she was outflanked. She needed to link up with Graves. She slung the massive rifle across her back. It was heavy, nearly 30 pounds, biting into her shoulders, and drew the Glock again. She moved towards the lobby, taking an alternate route through the ruined cafeteria. In the lobby, the tide had turned momentarily. The grenade and the thunderous sniper shot had spooked the advancing mercenaries. They had pulled back to the entryway, taking cover behind the overturned security desk. Major Silas Graves was bleeding from 2 new flesh wounds, one in his thigh and one in his non-shooting arm. He was down to his last magazine. "Sound off!" Graves yelled to his remaining private. "Still here, Major. Down to 30 rounds." Graves wiped blood out of his eyes. They were dead. It was just a matter of time. The enemy was regrouping for a final push. Suddenly, a figure materialized from the shadows to his left, sliding across the floor to take cover behind a thick structural column next to him. Graves almost shot her. He stared, his brain struggling to process the image. It was the nurse, the grey-haired, mousy woman who had checked IVs, but she wasn't wearing scrubs now. She was in tactical gear, moving with a lethal grace that screamed, "Operator!" And strapped to her back was a Chaytak M200, a weapon Graves had only seen used by extreme long-range specialists. "Nurse Cole," Graves breathed, lowering his weapon slightly. "Focus, Major," Bea said, her eyes scanning the enemy positions across the lobby. She didn't look at him. She raised her Glock, firing 2 quick shots that forced a mercenary head back down behind the desk. "Where the hell did you get that hardware?" Graves demanded, his voice tight with shock and adrenaline. "Supply closet," B said flatly. "They're setting up a heavy weapon at the door." Looks like an M240 Bravo. If they get that mounted, they'll turn this lobby into sawdust." Graves looked. Sure enough, 2 men were mounting a belt-fed machine gun on the reception desk. "We can't stop that with small arms," Graves said grimly. "You can't," Bee corrected. She holstered the Glock and swung the massive rifle off her back. The space behind the pillar was tight. She had to angle her body precariously to get the barrel around the concrete edge without exposing herself. "Cover me," she ordered. It wasn't a request. It was a command from one professional to another. Graves didn't argue. He leaned out and dumped half his remaining magazine towards the door, drawing their fire. Bullets chipped the concrete inches from Bee's face, spraying her with silica dust. She didn't flinch. She looked through the high-powered scope. At this close range, barely 60 feet, the field of view was incredibly narrow. All she could see was the receiver of the machine gun and the hands of the man loading the belt. She breathed out, steadying the 29-pound rifle freehand. She adjusted her aim slightly, targeting not the man, but the weapon itself. Specifically, the feed tray mechanism. She squeezed the trigger. Boom! The shot was deafening. The 408 solid brass round slammed into the receiver of the M240 machine gun. The impact was catastrophic. The machine gun didn't just break, it exploded into shrapnel of twisted metal and springs. The man loading it screamed as the metal fragments tore into his face and chest. The heavy weapon threat was neutralized. Bee cycled the bolt, the massive action clunking loudly. Graves stared at her. The red light deepened the shadows on her face, making her look ancient and terrifying. He suddenly realized where he had seen that specific, eerie calm before, years ago. A joint task force briefing in Virginia. A blurred photo on a screen of a Delta asset, credited with impossible shots in impossible conditions. Codename, the Wraith. The program had been shuttered after a disastrous mission in Yemen, where everyone was presumed KIA. "My God," Graves whispered, the realization hitting him harder than a bullet. "You're Cole. Beatrix Cole. The Yemen Initiative." Bee looked at him then. Her eyes, usually so dull, were hard as diamonds. "That woman died 6 years ago, Major. Right now, I'm the only thing keeping you alive. Are we clear?" Graves swallowed hard. The protocol part of his brain wanted to arrest her for being AWOL and falsifying her identity. The survival part of his brain wanted to kiss her boots. "Crystal clear," Graves said. "What's the play?" Before Bee could answer, a new sound cut through the night. Not gunfire. A low, rhythmic whooshing sound coming from the rear of the hospital. Bee's head snapped toward the sound. "Helicopter, inbound low." "Friendly?" Graves asked, hope flaring. "No," Bee said, her face grim. "They aren't here to rescue us. They're here to extract the diplomat. The hard way." Kalen had realized he couldn't take the lobby with Bear covering it. He was changing tactics. He was bringing in an extraction team directly through the roof of the trauma bay, where Dr. Liam and Chloe were hiding with the target. "They're going for the roof," Bee said, already moving. "If they breach the ceiling in triage, everyone in there dies." She didn't wait for Graves. She took off at a dead run back toward the triage bay, lugging the giant rifle. "Private, on me! We push the front door now!" Graves yelled to his remaining man, realizing Bear had just left the front door, entirely unguarded to save the others. Bee burst into the triage bay, just as the sound of rotor blades became deafening directly overhead. Dust and ceiling tiles began to rain down on Dr. Liam, who was hunched over the diplomat. "They're landing on the roof!" Chloe screamed. "Move him! Get him under the door frame!" Bee shouted, pointing to the reinforced structural entryway of the bay. Liam dragged the unconscious man just as a massive section of the drywall ceiling collapsed inward. Ropes dropped through the gaping hole, followed instantly by 4 operatives in black rappel harnesses, swinging down into the center of the room. They landed heavily, weapons raised, lasers sweeping the dust-filled room. They weren't expecting the nurse in the corner holding a cannon. Bee didn't have time to aim carefully. She hip-fired the Che-Tak at the first man whose feet touched the floor. The round hit him in the thigh. It didn't just wound him, it severed the leg completely mid-thigh. He collapsed with a horrific shriek, his femoral artery pumping blood onto the white tile. The other 3 operatives spun toward her, their submachine guns opening up. Bea dove behind a heavy surgical instrument cart, bullets sparking off the metal. She was pinned down, her massive rifle useless for quick follow-up shots in this swirling dust cloud. One of the operatives, a giant of a man, ignored her and lunged for the diplomat, grabbing the unconscious man by his suit jacket and hauling him towards the hoisting ropes. "No!" Liam yelled, grabbing the diplomat's legs, trying to pull him back. The operative backhanded Liam with the butt of his rifle, sending the doctor sprawling across the floor, dazed and bleeding. Bea peered around the cart. The operative was clipping a harness to the diplomat. In 10 seconds, they would be winched up into the helicopter and gone. She couldn't get a clear shot with the Che-Tak without hitting the diplomat. Her pistol was empty. She saw Liam on the floor, his hand near a tray of surgical instruments. "Liam!" she screamed over the rotor noise. "The scalpel! Throw me the scalpel!" Liam, dazed, looked at her, then down at the tray. He grabbed a #10 scalpel and skidded it across the blood-slicked floor toward her. Bea snatched it up. It was a ridiculous weapon against men in body armor. But Bea Cole didn't need a big weapon. She just needed an opening. She stood up from behind the cart, completely exposed, launching herself at the operative holding the diplomat. The operative saw her coming, a middle-aged woman with a tiny blade. He smirked beneath his balaclava, raising his rifle to finish her. He underestimated the speed of the wraith. She slapped the rifle barrel aside with her left hand, stepping inside his guard. With her right hand, she didn't stab. She slashed, a precise, shallow cut across the exposed skin of his neck, just above the line of his body armor, right where the carotid artery pulsed. It was a surgical strike delivered with the speed of a viper. The operative gasped, his hands flying to his neck as blood sprayed. He staggered back, releasing the diplomat. Bea spun, grabbing the diplomat's collar and dragging him back under the cover of the doorframe, just as the other 2 operatives opened fire on her position, shredding the air where she had been standing a second before. She was trapped, out of ammo, with a high-value target and 2 terrified civilians, facing down 2 elite killers, while a helicopter hovered overhead. And then, the diplomat's eyes fluttered open. He looked up, groggy, pain-filled eyes focusing on the woman leaning over him, the woman with the grey bun and the face smeared with silica dust and blood. His eyes widened in impossible recognition. "Agent 49, he wheezed, coughing blood. "Beatrix? They said you were dead in Yemen." Bea stared down at him, the sounds of the firefight fading for just a second. "I am dead, sir. Now stay down if you want to keep it that way." The triage bay was a cauldron of noise. The helicopter's rotors beat the air into a frenzy, whipping the dust and medical paperwork into a blinding cyclone. Above them, through the jagged hole in the roof, the belly of the transport chopper was visible, dark and menacing against the storm clouds. Bea pressed herself flat against the doorframe, shielding the diplomat. Arthur Sterling had been his name in the files, but names didn't matter now, only mass and velocity. "Stay down!" she hissed at Arthur. The 2 remaining operatives in the center of the room were professional. They didn't rush her. They split up. One moved to the left, overturning a gurney for cover, his MP5 submachine gun trained on Bea's position. The other moved right, pulling a flashbang from his vest. "Flash out!" the operative yelled. Bea saw the metallic glint of the canister arcing through the air. She didn't look away. She didn't have time. Instead, she grabbed a heavy woolen blanket from the crash cart beside her and threw it over herself and Arthur, just as the grenade detonated. Bang! Even with the blanket and her eyes squeezed shut, the flash was a white-hot, searing pain behind her eyelids. The sound was a physical punch to the gut. Her ears rang with a high-pitched squeal that drowned out the rotor blades. But she was alive, and she was counting. 1, 2, 3. She threw the blanket off. The operative on the right was advancing, assuming she was stunned. He was wrong. Bea didn't have a gun. She had a scalpel. But she also had the element of absolute, suicidal aggression. She surged up from the floor, not retreating, but charging the man. He hesitated for a fraction of a second, surprised that the target wasn't cowering. Bea slid on her knees across the blood-slicked tile, coming in under his firing arc. She grabbed the barrel of his MP5 with her left hand, searing her palm on the hot metal, and shoved it upward. With her right, she drove the scalpel into the gap between his tactical vest and his armpit. It wasn't a kill shot, but it severed the nerves in his brachial plexus. His arm went dead instantly. He screamed, dropping the weapon. Bea didn't stab him again. She didn't have time. She snatched the falling MP5 out of the air before it hit the ground. She rolled onto her back, bringing the submachine gun up, and fired a burst at the second operative across the room, just as he popped up to shoot. The bullet sparked off the metal gurney, forcing him back down. "Liam!" Bea screamed, her voice raw. "Get Arthur to the pharmacy. It has reinforced concrete walls. Go!" Dr. Liam Kincaid, clutching his bruised ribs, grabbed the bewildered diplomat. "Come on, move!" They scrambled out of the triage bay into the hallway. Bea provided covering fire, walking backward, sending short, controlled bursts into the center of the room to keep the remaining operative pinned. Suddenly the radio on the dead operative's vest crackled. It was Kalen's voice. "Skyhook 1, suppress the target. I'm breaching the north wall. We're crushing them in the middle." Bea cursed. The north wall. That was directly behind the pharmacy. If Kalen breached there, Liam and the diplomat would be walking into a slaughter. She grabbed the radio off the dead man's chest. "Kalen!" She spoke into the mic, her voice dripping with cold malice. There was a pause on the line. The gunfire outside seemed to lull for a second. "Who is this?" Kalen asked. "You're losing men, Kalen. Good men. Expensive men. And for what? A politician?" "I know that voice," Kalen said, a tone of realization creeping in. "Major Graves said there was a nurse, but you don't sound like a nurse. You sound like Yemen." Bea felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold rain. "If you breach the north wall," Bear said, "I will blow the oxygen manifold. The whole wing goes up. You don't get the diplomat. You just get a crater. You're bluffing. You won't kill your own patients. I'm not a nurse tonight, Kalen. Try me." She smashed the radio against the wall. It was a bluff, mostly. She wouldn't kill the patients. But she needed Kalen to hesitate. She needed him to doubt the intelligence he was getting. She turned and ran towards the pharmacy, catching up with Liam and Arthur. "Change of plan," Bea said, breathless. "Pharmacy is a trap. We're going to the morgue." Liam stared at her, his white coat stained red. "The morgue? It's in the basement." "It's a dead end. It has one entrance," Bea said, checking the magazine on the stolen MP5, "and it's the only place in this building with walls thick enough to stop a .50 caliber round. We make our stand there." "And then what?" Liam asked, his voice trembling. Bea looked at him. The adrenaline was fading, leaving a cold, hard clarity. "Then we wait for the sun," she said, "or we die, whichever comes first." The basement morgue of Field Hospital Bravo was a cold, sterile, concrete box. It smelled of formaldehyde and damp earth. The only light came from the battery-powered emergency strips along the floor, casting long, grotesque shadows against the stainless steel body drawers. Bea shoved a heavy metal gurney against the thick steel door, barricading it. "It won't hold them forever," Arthur said. He was sitting on the floor, leaning against a cabinet, clutching his side. The shock was wearing off, and the diplomat was returning. "They have thermal charges. They'll cut through the hinges." "I know," Bear said. She was stripping the gear off the dead operative she had looted earlier. Grenades, ammo, a combat knife. She handed a spare pistol to Dr. Liam. Liam looked at the gun like it was a venomous snake. "I took an oath, Bea. Do no harm." That oath applies to patients, Liam, B said, her eyes locking onto his. Those men upstairs aren't patients. They are a disease, and right now, you're the cure. Take the damn gun. Liam swallowed hard and took the weapon. His hands were shaking. B, Arthur said softly, why are you here? The agency scrubbed your file. We thought you turned, or that you were liquidated. B didn't look at him. She was setting up a tripwire across the entrance, using a roll of surgical tape and a flashbang grenade. I didn't turn, she said quietly. I just stopped. After Yemen, after the village, I couldn't look through a scope anymore without seeing their faces. I wanted to save lives for a change. I wanted to wash the blood off. She looked at her hands. They were covered in grease, dust, and fresh blood. Turns out, she whispered, the blood doesn't wash off. A massive thud shook the ceiling above them. Then another. They're inside, Beer said. They're clearing the ground floor. They'll be at the stairwell in 2 minutes. She walked over to the corner where she had stashed the Chetak M200 intervention. She had carried the beast of a rifle all the way down here. It seemed useless in such a small room, a weapon designed for miles, not meters. But B had a plan. Liam, Arthur, she said, get in the back, behind the refrigeration units. Stay low. What are you going to do? Liam asked. I'm going to knock. B didn't aim at the door. She walked to the far wall of the morgue. She knew the blueprints of this facility better than the architects. Directly on the other side of this concrete wall was the main boiler room, and running along the ceiling of the boiler room was the main fuel line for the backup generators. If Kalen was smart, and he was, he would stage his team in the boiler room before breaching the morgue. It was the only cover in the basement hallway. She visualized the room through the concrete. She calculated the angles. She set up the Chetak on a metal autopsy table, extending the bipod legs. She loaded a fresh magazine of the solid brass rounds. These bullets could punch through an engine block. A 6-inch concrete wall was nothing to them. She waited. She closed her eyes and listened. Not with her ears, but with the instincts honed over 20 years of hunting. She felt the vibrations in the floor. Heavy boots, multiple contacts, stacking up. Breaching charge ready, a muffled voice came through the wall. Kalen. He was right there, on the other side of the concrete. Bay opened her eyes. She exhaled, her breath steady. Welcome to the hospital, she whispered. She pulled the trigger. Boom! The sound in the enclosed concrete room was apocalyptic. The recoil slammed into her shoulder. The bullet punched a clean hole through the concrete wall. On the other side, in the boiler room, the round didn't hit a man. It hit the high-pressure fuel pipe B had aimed for. The fuel sprayed out, vaporizing instantly under the pressure. B cycled the bolt. Clang. She aimed 6 inches to the right, at the electrical junction box she knew was mounted there. She fired again. Boom! The bullet smashed the junction box. Sparks flew into the cloud of vaporized diesel fuel. The result was instantaneous. A dull whump shook the foundation of the hospital, followed by a roar like a jet engine. The boiler room on the other side of the wall turned into a blast furnace. Screams erupted from behind the wall, terrible, agonizing screams that were quickly cut short by the consumption of oxygen. The blast door of the morgue rattled in its frame, but held. My God, Arthur whispered, staring at the wall where smoke was starting to seep through the bullet holes. Thermobaric effect, B said clinically, though her hands were trembling slightly. Confined space, fuel vapor, it burns the air. She stood up, leaving the rifle. It's not over. Kalen won't be in the stack. He leads from the back. As if on cue, the radio on her belt crackled. You burned them, Kalen's voice came through. He sounded breathless, coughing. He had survived, likely staying in the stairwell. You burned my men alive. I told you to leave, B said. I'm going to peel the skin off your face, Kalen snarled. I'm going to... A new sound cut him off, a high-pitched whine that grew into a roar. The sound of jet engines, fast movers. B looked up at the ceiling. Do you hear that, Kalen? Bravo ground, this is Vulture 1-1. A pilot's voice crackled over the open emergency frequency. We have eyes on the thermal signatures. Cleared hot on all hostile targets outside the perimeter. Cavalry, B said, a grim smile touching her lips. Major Graves must have fixed the comms. The ground shook as the airstrike hit the mercenaries stationed outside. Kalen was alone now. His army was dead or dying, and he was trapped in a burning basement hallway with the most dangerous woman on Earth. The silence that followed the airstrike was heavy, broken only by the dripping of water from fire suppression sprinklers. B unlocked the morgue door. She had the Glock in her hand. "Stay here," she told Liam and Arthur. She stepped out into the hallway. The air was thick with smoke and the smell of burnt diesel. The door to the boiler room was blown off its hinges. Inside, it was a charnel house. But the stairwell was empty. B moved up the stairs, clearing each corner. She reached the ground floor lobby. The sun was just beginning to crest over the Zagros Mountains, casting a pale, bruised, purple light through the shattered windows. The rain had stopped. Major Silas Graves was sitting on the floor near the entrance, a bloody bandage wrapped around his thigh. He was smoking a cigarette that looked like it had been flattened in a pocket. He looked up as Bay approached. He didn't raise his rifle. "Kalen?" B asked. Graves pointed toward the courtyard. B walked to the door. Lying in the mud, face down, was the massive form of the mercenary leader. He had tried to run when the jets arrived. A 20mm cannon round from a strafing run had caught him a few yards from the gate. It was over. B lowered the gun. The adrenaline crashed, leaving her legs feeling like lead. She slumped against the doorframe, sliding down until she hit the wet floor. Graves limped over and sat next to her. For a long time, neither of them spoke. They just watched the sun come up over the wreckage of the hospital. "Diplomat?" Graves asked. "Alive. In the basement. Dr. Kincaid is with him." Graves nodded. He took a drag of the cigarette and offered it to her. B took it, her fingers leaving a smear of soot on the white paper. She took a long drag, the smoke stinging her lungs in a way that felt grounding. "Rescue bird is 5 minutes out," Graves said. "Secure transport. They'll debrief everyone. Langley is going to be all over this." He looked at her sideways. "They're going to run Prince, B. As soon as you step on that bird, Nurse Beatrix Cole ceases to exist. And considering you're technically a ghost, they might just lock you in a hole for the rest of your life to keep their secrets." B stared at the mountains. He was right. Agent 49 was supposed to be dead. If she went back, she wouldn't be hailed as a hero. She would be processed as a loose end. "I can't go back, Silas," she said softly. Graves stared at the cigarette ash. The perimeter fence on the south side was blown open by the mortar fire. Lead vehicle left a dirt bike near the tree line. I saw it. B looked at him. "I have to write my report," Graves said, looking deliberately away from her towards the incoming helicopters in the distance. "It's going to be a mess. Confusion of battle. Hard to keep track of personnel. I'll probably report that the brave night nurse, Beatrix Cole, died in the initial breach. Tragically killed while trying to save patients. Body unrecoverable in the fire." He turned to look at her, his eyes warm. She was a hero. That's how I'll remember her. B felt a lump in her throat. She reached out and squeezed his hand, a brief, soldier's grip. "Thank you, Major." "Go," Graves said, "before they land." B stood up. She didn't look back at the hospital. She didn't look back at the life she had tried to build. It was gone, burned to ash in a single night. But she was alive. She ran towards the tree line, her silhouette disappearing into the morning mist just as the first rescue helicopter touched down. Inside the hospital, Arthur Sterling was being helped onto a stretcher by the paramedics. "Where is she?" Arthur demanded, looking around frantically. "The nurse, the woman who saved us." Major Graves walked up, his face an unreadable mask of stone. "I'm sorry, sir," Graves said, his voice steady. "We didn't find her. She didn't make it." Arthur looked at the open door, at the empty hills beyond. He saw the faint tire tracks of a motorcycle in the mud, leading away from the war. He looked at Graves, and he understood. "I see. Arthur said quietly. A tragedy. The world should know her name. No, sir, Graves said, watching the mist. The world doesn't need to know her name. They just need to know that when the darkness came, she was the one holding the light. Graves turned back to the chaos of the hospital. The night nurse was gone. The wraith was in the wind. And somewhere, out in the wild, the Guardian was still watching. So that is the story of Beatrix Cole, the woman who tried to bury her war, but dug it up to save the innocent. It makes you wonder how many people walking past us in scrubs, or suits, or uniforms are hiding a past we couldn't possibly imagine. Real heroes don't always wear capes. Sometimes they wear blood-stained scrubs and carry the weight of the world in silence. If you enjoyed this story, please smash that like button. It really helps the channel grow. Share this video with a friend who loves a good thriller, and don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell notification so you never miss a story. Let me know in the comments. Do you think B should have stayed and accepted the glory, or was disappearing the only choice she had? I'll see you in the next video.